Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. We are in the book of First Chronicles, chapter 14. Let's start in verse 1. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David along with cedar logs, stonemasons, and carpenters to build a palace for him. And David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that his kingdom had been highly exalted for the sake of his people Israel. This passage is identical to the passage in 2 Samuel, and the only thing different is in 2 Samuel, it comes before the story of moving the ark. And in fact, all of chapter 14 comes before the moving of the ark story. Here it's told in the middle of it. The theories about why the difference is apparently the people writing Chronicles thought that this happened in the 3 months between the first attempt to move the ark and the second attempt to move the ark. And they were also in a kingdom that did history much more chronologically than the Israelites had done. And they were attempting to use that model. The Babylonians had over 1,000 years of history of writing the chronicle of their kings, and had were used to doing it in a more time-ordered fashion. They didn't tell histories as chronologically as we do today, but they were more similar to what we do today in the West than the Jews had been doing. And that had influenced the Jews in how they did things. That's the popular theory among scholars about why they moved what had been before the moving of the ark into the middle of the moving of the ark. And we have no evidence one way or the other than the two different accounts and knowledge of the two different cultures. Verse 3. In Jerusalem, David took more wives and became the father of sons and daughters. These are the names of the children born to him there: Shammah, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishu, Elpelet, Nogah, Nopheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphelet. These are children born to David in Jerusalem. We have an account somewhere else of the ones that were born to him before he got to Jerusalem. There's actually 2 places these records are kept. One of them is in 2 Samuel, and what's interesting about that is in 2 Samuel, it's in chapter 5, we have the same list, except it has 3 differences in names. There's 2 names that are in this list that aren't in the 2 Samuel list, and there's a name in the 2 Samuel list that's not in this list. So the thought is these 3 names were children who died in childhood somewhere, and so weren't recorded in one place or the other. We've noted before that childhood mortality was high, and it happened in the palace too. being rich and famous did not keep you from the same maladies that went all over the place. And David's children died just like anybody else's. Of course, they probably didn't have safe drinking water. They didn't have as good a concept of food sanitation as we have today, etc. So there was lots of reasons, and of course had no vaccines to vaccinate their children. Childhood diseases were rampant and ran around and killed a lot of children. So that's the most likely case. The other explanation, but I don't find it very likely, is that these may have been daughters and therefore not as important to the story. The problem is the names are masculine names. There are feminine names in this list, but not the names that are changed. Then the other place these names are found is in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, where it's noted that Bathsheba had 4 sons in Jerusalem, and the first 4 names are hers. And that there's another wife named, and she had 9. And the same 9 are listed here. So it is, and they're enlisted in the same order. So it's very evident that these were the children of 2 specific women. And what's interesting to note in both of those cases, normally children were listed in birth order. Even the Jews did that. Solomon is the last of Bathsheba's children. So he's not just a younger son of a, not first or second wife. He's like last child of a wife that was publicly disfavored because David had committed adultery with her and then killed her husband and then married her and had children. So she's an interesting one to be the one that ends up being the bearer of the next king. And Solomon is not even her first son that was born. We don't know from any account what the name of the son was that David mourned for, that was the conception from the adultery. It may be the first name in this list, Shammua. But if so, we have no knowledge of that. It may be that he's the 5th child and never mentioned because he died quickly. And we just don't know. Solomon was apparently very special because Nathan the prophet picked him out when he was born. We find that out in Samuel, and said he would be king. So he was picked out to be king way sooner than all the other stories about the other older brothers attempting to be king and causing rebellion and civil war and dissension. And Solomon apparently was taught to be a administrator under his brothers, and then ended up being promoted to being in the lineage to be king, and was promoted over his older brothers by his mother. And then later, David promises Bathsheba that Solomon will be king. Apparently, David saw that Solomon would be a wiser man than his older brothers and chose him. And, because of that, then we have the rest of the story. And, the end of 2 Samuel deals with the intrigues, and the beginning of Kings deals with the intrigues and what happens, and the end of David's life and beginning of Solomon's rule. And so that is the list of children born to David there. The other interesting thing in the 1 Chronicles 3 passage, it said that David had other wives and other concubines that also bore him children but did not name them, either the wives and concubines or the children. So after David becomes king in Jerusalem, he apparently takes many, many wives and many, many women, and some of them live with him in his palace. Others live apart, and he goes out and visits them. So he becomes like most of the other wealthy, politically powerful in the surrounding cultures. And wealthy men in surrounding cultures would take multiple wives, multiple concubines. And we have some evidence that in Jewish culture that happened. If you read the Judges, there's references to, different people doing that. The kings of Israel were not supposed to do that. David did it. And he's not called out on it for it. Solomon is called out for it, but not very much. And then the rest of the kings of Israel and Judah, the practice is they don't have that many wives. Apparently, it was recognized that it was against the law of Moses, and it was literally a bad idea. And so, while David did it and Solomon did it a whole lot more, it fell out of fashion. For one thing, it's very expensive. And if you're not a farmer, having a bunch of sons and a bunch of children is an expensive proposition. And now, if you're raising crops, they're free labor. And so a farmer having a bunch of children is a good thing. And, limited number of them acquire the farm in inheritance, and the others work it and then have to go off and do something else when they grow up. And when you're king, on the other hand, having a bunch of ready soldiers and having people that you will train to be ministers for the one that becomes king is a good thing. But you don't need dozens and dozens of wives to produce enough ministers for the next generation. You don't need. And that also creates political instability. And if you have too big a pool, some of them may think they should be king, and therefore exposing your son to possible overthrow. Verse 8. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over all Israel, they went up in full force to search for him, but David heard about it and went out to meet them. Now the Philistines had come and raided the valley of Rephaim, so David inquired of God, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you hand them over to me?" The Lord answered him, "Go, I will hand them over to you." So David and his men went up to Baal Perazim, and there he defeated them. He said, "As waters break out, God has broken out against my enemies by my hand." So that place was named Baal Perazim. The Philistines had abandoned their gods there, and David gave orders to burn them in the fire. So this is a telling of how after he becomes king, the Philistines realized, oops, we made a mistake. We defeated Saul, but now the guy that used to be in our army that we rejected, he's become king, and not just king, but Saul's family has been defeated, and David's king of the whole country. We better, while he's still weak, go and attack him. Well, the thing was, David was never weak. David was a good warrior, and he organized his men well. And they basically came up with a mob, and they were raiding the valley as they came, and David was defending the country. He wasn't out on a mission to kill a weak king. He was on a mission to defend the country against invaders. And so he took a well-disciplined army, well-trained army, and he didn't just raise a bunch of troops. He took the army that had been with him, and some of them for decades, and a bunch of them, well, all of them had been trained by him and were a standing professional army. And probably on the battlefield it looked like they're going to be overwhelmed. They were probably outnumbered vastly, but they were also very capable warriors, trained. They had been armed. They had training in how to use their weapons and how to defend each other and how to do hand-to-hand combat. And they were directed by somebody who was good at it. And so he also inquired of the Lord, should I go attack them? And he did. And the Lord told him go, and he won. And they abandoned their gods, their idols, as they fled and as the troops killed them. And David, in his insistence, we're going to worship Yahweh, had the soldiers, after it was done, take the idols and burn them so nobody would be able to use these false gods and worship them and think that somehow they were getting some sort of benefit from it. He was having the country to worship Yahweh and Yahweh only. And that's the important part of this story. Now, this part of the story is word for word in the Hebrew, exactly the same in both 2 Samuel, and that's 2 Samuel chapter 5, and 1 Chronicles 14. Again, in 2 Samuel, it comes before the story of the ark being moved instead of the middle, like it is here. But it's very evident that the chroniclers, the ones that wrote Chronicles, they just copied Samuel's, account, and it got recorded here. Verse 13, once again more the Philistines raided the valley, so David inquired of God again, and God answered him, do not go straight up, but circle around them and attack them in front of the balsam trees. As soon as you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, move out to battle, because that will mean God has gone out in front of you to strike the Philistine army. So David did as God commanded him, and they struck down the Philistine army all the way from Gibeon to Gezer. So David's fame spread throughout every land, and the Lord made all the nations fear him. Again, these verses are identical to 2 Samuel 5. It's the same story, same part of the story. It's just copied here. The second time the Philistines invaded the land to try to conquer David, he inquired of the Lord again. So he is inquiring of the Lord before every battle, and he's wanting to seek God's guidance. And God basically tells him, set up an ambush. Don't go straight up and attack the front of the Philistines, but go around behind them. And it's interesting, God has David come through the trees. The style of warfare they used then, combat in trees was not particularly effective. And the Philistines particularly were not effective at it. But slingers, archers, spear throwers, attaxal throwers, all the projectile people who normally were behind the frontline troops were ineffective in a forest. Because, you sling a stone in a forest, you might, one, hit a tree with your sling, and two, even if you managed to find a space big enough you could swing your sling and then throw the stone, it might hit a tree or a branch or something, and that would be a danger to your own troops. You had to be out in the open to do that. Likewise, archers. You could shoot between trees, and you could stand behind a tree and shoot, but you were likely to hit limbs and branches and trees in front of you. Now, if you were on the very edge of the forest, the last tree, yeah, okay, it offered you protection, and, you had a clear shot, but you were also as far from the other troop as possible. Likewise, spear throwers and attaxal throwers are also far from the troops. They run the risk of throwing into trees and limbs and stuff. Out in the open is the appropriate place for ranged weapons. So this does take the Philistines by surprise. For one thing, David's coming up behind them. They don't expect an attack from behind. Two, they're not expecting somebody to be marching out of the trees. That's an undefended area. And so they were prepared for a frontal attack from the front, and David's attacking out of the tree line behind them, where they're undefended and not expecting him to be. And he puts a great deal of damage on them that day. And they break and run, and once their ranks break, it's easy pickings, and they get to pick them off, and they chase them down for roughly 25 miles, killing them the whole way, and inflict a great deal of damage to the Philistines. And they're basically running home. And so David gets a great victory. And this gets him a great reputation that goes out into all the surrounding territory. And so he gets a reputation for being a great king and a great warrior. and somebody you don't mess with easily. So it's very likely that this was actually his first set of battles. Last week we noted that he was bringing people from down in Lebanon, down in Egypt, up to in Lebanon, and we said there was two possibilities: he either conquered down there and up there, or Israelites were living outside the country. This indicates they were probably living outside the country, and that he was consulting with all the Israelites, regardless of where they were, and asking them to come back to celebrate the moving of the ark. It's most likely that these were Israelites living in foreign countries, but claiming allegiance to the Israelite king. Not conquered territory, not part of the country, but borders were, unless they were at war, looser things than we view them today. Today, there's a great deal of drawing a map, and you can literally know when you step across the border. And there's places where there's a city on the border. And like Texarkana is in Texas and in Arkansas. And there are streets where literally you stop at this stop sign, you're in Texas, you cross the street, you're now in Arkansas. Coming back, you stop at the stop sign, you're in Arkansas, you cross the street, and you're now in Texas. There's places elsewhere in the world where even national borders are, within a city or, wherever. And you have this boundary, and there's one place where I think it's Luxembourg and Belgium. It's in a city, but there is a shop where the border runs through the middle of the shop, and the store owner has the floor paved and a line down where the border is, and you can, while you shop, cross back and forth across the border multiple times, and you know exactly which country you're in. It's amusing, but that kind of demarcation of the border is a fairly actually modern invention. The Romans attempted to get it done. The Egyptians attempted to get it done, but on the northern border with the Philistines and the Israelites, they tended to mark it as some sort of geological feature. This river, this valley, this geological feature. And but it was an area where not many people lived. So Israelites could very easily cross the border, go live, build a settlement, farm, tend their sheep, and be literally in Egypt. But the border was not defended. The border was not, did not have, taxing authorities taking taxes as you cross the border, tariffs and that kind of thing. There wasn't an army defending it to keep you from crossing it illegally. It was just, we claim to there, we're going to tax you if you're living in our country once we come around to collect taxes. But if you claim you're from a different country, well, you're just from a different country living in our country. And they thought it was useless, worthless land. that was useful for military purposes. And they kind of viewed it as, if an invading army comes in, we know when they've invaded the country because they crossed the line, but they're also out in good territory. It's good for fighting. And before they get to the important part of the country, we can go attack them out on a good place to fight. So we put the border out on the other side so we know when they invade, and then we can attack them and conquer them after they've invaded. And it's very clear, because if you've put your army in our territory, you've invaded, but it's not land we care about. And we can defeat you out where it doesn't matter. And then, maybe for a while we'll keep a border outpost out there to make sure you don't send an army back. But when we're comfortable you're not going to invade again, why keep the expense? And so that's probably what was going on with the northern border of Egypt. On the other hand, the Israelites were like, land on the other side of that valley is just like the Negev. Hey, we're living here and prospering, so why not go live there and prosper? And so they just crossed the border, set up a settlement, set up farm, raise sheep, goats, whatever, and they were doing what they did on the other side of the border. And they didn't think they were out of their country. They were just expanding their country. Nobody stopped us. Probably some of the same things in Lebanon. They were just living in the same ecology, and so what? Somebody claims it's a national border, but nobody's enforcing it, so we're living here now. And so David sent for all his people, regardless of where they lived. And David probably had some sort of, well, we know he had an alliance with the Lebanese. And they were his allies. So no offense there if our people share and get along. He probably had an alliance with the Egyptians also. And but after these two battles, everybody else heard how effective he was in battle. He marched up with a smaller army and defeated them twice. Once was with excellent tactics. The other time, apparently excellent tactics, but an excellent army. And he had the ability to raise a huge army like the Philistines did. And there's times that he did so. And the people responded like he had trained them. So he was in the process of turning the country into a sound military country, but he did so by having a sound, standing professional army who could defeat much larger enemies, much larger armies. And so he was doing so, and that reputation spread throughout the surrounding countries, and they were probably very afraid to attack him, because the Philistines were known for being good warriors and being good at war, and here he had defeated them twice on territory the Philistines thought was theirs and they knew, and Israel thought was theirs and they knew. And David defeated a larger army twice with a smaller army, and that told all the other countries he's somebody to be reckoned with. David was doing exactly what God called him to do, to defend the country and to make it a safe country so he could institute Yahweh worship. And he instituted that Yahweh worship from the very beginning. Because after the battle, when they captured all the foreign gods, he had them burned. And did not let people walk off with them as prizes and then wonder, well, what's it like to worship this God? He didn't let that happen. He was focusing people on worshiping Yahweh. And that's part of why this is in here and why the chroniclers told it. They're showing that David not only was bringing the ark up and wanting people to worship Yahweh correctly, but he was also adamant that they should not worship the foreign gods, and was purifying the worship of the country and making them worship Yahweh. Holy Father, have us to be devoted to you the way David was, a man after your own heart, that he may not have known, and he may have been ignorant, and he may have done things that he shouldn't have done, but out of ignorance. But he was a man that tried to do it right. And Lord, have us to be that kind of people. And that when we found we've done it wrong, we will search your word and then do it right. That we will not be content to just kind of do it our way. That like David, when he found out he'd done it wrong, he took corrective action and then did it right. That he was one that consulted you to do his work, and because he consulted you, you made him successful. Lord, help us to be that kind of people, that we study your word, learn it, and that we consult with you, ask you to bless what we do, and do it your way so that you can bless us. And then when we are successful because we've done it your way and the way you want us to do it, and that causes us to be successful, have us to be people that give you credit, not take it for the credit for ourselves. In your holy name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, and this has been the Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. This was recorded on Saturday, March 8th, 2025, and today has been a kind of an interesting day. It's been a tough week for me. Weather's not been nice. Last Saturday, I had all kinds of problems, didn't get to walk. I've had short walks on certain days. Today, I tried to catch up, couldn't. I'm still behind. It rained today. The garden's doing well. It's all green and sprouting up and looks pretty. God's blessing. But all my goals didn't happen. I think God's goals are happening. I hope to see you at church tomorrow. I'm looking forward to the sermon Oscar has. I'm also anticipating the Palm Sunday service. It sounds wonderful. I know what the choir's preparing, being in choir. And the Good Friday service, I know what the choir is preparing, and I look forward to that. And I absolutely encourage you, come to the Easter service. It's going to be phenomenal. Invite family and friends and neighbors and co-workers. It is the kind of thing you want to invite people to. They will need to hear the gospel. They will be thrilled with the good music and presented with the gospel in multiple forms. So, I encourage you, invite people to the Easter service. Let's pack the sanctuary. Let's pack it and see as many people hear the gospel presented as possible. If I don't see you tomorrow, I hope you come to the Bible study on Wednesday. And if not, if nothing else, we'll see you here on YouTube. Have a blessed week.